it's almost 700 feet below sea level. There's a dramatic drop, you guys, of just 32 miles from 1,200 feet to 700 feet below sea level. By the way, that incredible valley right there where you see the Jordan River and the headwaters of the Jordan River by Caesarea Philippi and Dan, that's where the Jordan is created, flowing out of the top of Mount Hermon. That water comes through. That's the Great Trans-Jordan River Rift, or the Trans-Jordan Rift, where an earthquake fault goes out to sea where Sidon is, comes down, descends all the way down to the opening areas of North Africa. That is the area of a great earthquake valley where this Jordan River, Dead Sea, Sea of Galilee exist. But very much below sea level. The weather there is wonderful almost every day of the year. It's so low and warm all the time that the growing season never ceases. It never stops. And so it's a very amazing place, very beautiful. So he goes from that region down in to that portion of Israel. And he's going to come now, having left Nazareth. You might want to look at the topography, the difference of it. Look at how Nazareth is. Nazareth in 1858 looked something like that by pencil drawing. This is drawn by someone who actually sat there and drew this by pencil in 1858 regarding Nazareth. And there's some other photos of Nazareth today. And we'll go through it in our tour. And you can see that it's a very populated area, a very dense area, a very large area. It's quite beautiful, by the way. Those mountains in the background take you into the Mediterranean Sea. And so it's a very, very exciting area. Jesus would have been there, his hometown, and then descended down into the Jordan River area. So as we look to our study today, as we look at what we're being taught on, the fact of the matter is Jesus Christ is now going to come on the scene in Capernaum in a little bit of a different way. Now watch this. In Nazareth, he opened up the Word of God and he taught them. They refused him. They had heard about his miracles, they had heard about his teaching, but when he came to town, they rejected him. He's going to come to Capernaum. They had heard about the rumors about Jesus. They had heard about his healings. He teaches them, he taught them, he instructs them. They do not reject him, but they receive him contrary to Nazareth. Two different cities, two different attitudes. Now, this is important to us. Because they receive him, things begin to happen. And Christian, that's always the case regarding our faith in God. If you open up your heart, if you'll just take that step and say, Lord, if you're real, if you're honest, you can even ask him that way. Lord, if you're real, will you show yourself to me? I'm never afraid to invite somebody to just say, if your heart's right, if your heart's sincere, if you really want to know, you call out to God, he'll reveal himself to you. Give them the gospel? Yes. But tell them, go home and pray and seek God and watch what happens. God will reveal himself. He's real, he's alive. And so Jesus is going to give them the gospel, and they're going to respond in Capernaum, where in Nazareth they did not respond. Point number one in our study together today, there'll be 4 points total. When Jesus comes near, number one thing we need to realize, and it's true today, is that he brings illumination. Will you jot that down? When Christ comes near, he always brings illumination, meaning that he will heighten your hunger for truth. When Christ comes near, he will provoke you. He will cause you to dig. He will cause you to search. Listen, as a pastor, I hear a lot of people say this thing that I'm about to say. Pastor, I just kind of skated through school. I got my degree or whatever I'm doing now. And I got to tell you, I just read enough books just to get by. Never quite finished any book ever, just enough to get the A on my exam, And all of a sudden, now that I'm a Christian, I can't stop reading the Bible. I can't stop reading books. I know people who attend this church who previously could not read. They came to know Jesus. Jesus gave them a hunger to learn, to know the Bible. They applied themselves to learning, to reading, and they started diving into the Bible and reading good books about God and about God's world that he's created. What happens? Well, just on the earthly plane of education, wherever Christ is preached and the Bible is honored, the education level goes up. Now, you may find that offensive if you're from some other geographical location of the world. I want to challenge you, though, with that. Wherever Jesus Christ is preached and the Bible is honored, you will see a standard of living and of education elevated. When you take Christ away, that begins to diminish in any or every culture. And listen, go look at history. Wherever the gospel is preached, go look at those nations or those countries or those cities. Wherever God is welcome, there's a honoring of human life. There is a civility about people. They don't even have to be Christians. There are hospitals. There are education centers. There's libraries. Wherever Christ goes, there is an elevation of the standard of life and a passion to know more. It's the way God works. You could say that God is anti-ignorance. And you look at many of the cults and of the false religions of the world today, and they love to keep people bound in ignorance. We think of the things that we're seeing now in Iraq. A world's record in the last 37 years where there are more women now going to school in Iraq because under Saddam Hussein's regime, they were not allowed to learn. They were not allowed to know. And you watch as Bibles will begin to flood into that Iraq. You watch people come to Christ. There'll be even more than the 55,000 Christians that were there before the fall of Iraq. Wherever the light goes, wherever Christ goes, people will be awakened to truth. You think about Europe and the great things that Europe achieved because Europe was founded upon the missionary ventures that came out of the Middle East. People came to Christ. Great institutions were founded and great government installed. You think of America, the most blessed nation in the history of mankind, the most powerful nation, a nation that once had the Bible everywhere, a nation that once in its actual federal annual budget, the government paid for the printing and distribution of Bibles around the world. Did you know that? The United States of America. Those days are gone, and you can only expect that the blessings will be retracted sooner or later as well, unless we turn back to God. But wherever Christ goes, he brings illumination, and that's true. Listen, how so? Number one, by teaching people about themselves. When Jesus taught, he taught people about themselves using, of course, the Word of God. Verse 31 says, then he went down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and he was teaching them on the Sabbaths. I know this sounds kind of silly and it's a little bit obscure, but will you take your pen or pencil and circle the word Sabbaths, the S on the end? Multiple. Back to back, every Sabbath, Jesus was teaching the people. He cared about them. And when he taught them, the word that's here in the Greek language in teaching them, it's the word that he taught them, didasko. The word means verse by verse. He gave them the Bible, and then out of it, he brought application. You say, well, Jack, where is that in the Bible? Well, at least two places. Number one, right here, didasko means verse by verse. He taught them verse by verse. That's why we teach verse by verse. Did you know that's the only reason why this church teaches verse by verse is because Jesus taught verse by verse. If Jesus teaches verse by verse, we need to do the same. Second thing is this. You know how you open the Gospels and it says Jesus opened his mouth and taught them this parable? We only have captured the parables. The parables came at the end of a verse by verse teaching. Did you know that? When you read that Jesus taught them parables, it means, first of all, that he had taught them a Bible study from the Bible and then wrapped it up with a parable. He gave illustration. So whenever you hear him teaching parable, it follows that he taught them Bible. And so he taught them about themselves, that they might know God, that they might experience God. And where did this teaching take place? It took place, as it says here in the little S at the end of Sabbaths, he taught them in the synagogues. The synagogues were the central place of learning for God's people. Now look with me. This is amazing to me, and I don't know, I get excited about this. Why? Because when Jesus was in Galilee, when Jesus was in Capernaum, that's before you right here, what's left of it is just this area right here. Church, listen, there are less people living in the Galilean Capernaum area right now than there was during the time of Jesus. There were tens of thousands of people living in Galilee when Jesus lived there. Now there's hardly any. It's a very small population. Look at this. This is wonderful. In fact, you see that little flying saucer there to the left? That black thing? Looks like a flying saucer, doesn't it? That's archaeologists have unearthed Peter's house. Peter's house has been unearthed right there. It's a pretty amazing find, but that's not what we're interested in this morning. Look to the right of it. No, back up. Look to the right of it. Look at this. See that? That is the synagogue that has been unearthed. We know from archaeological evidence that when that was unearthed, by the way, it was unearthed by Catholic monks that were German Catholic monks that during World War II, they were confined to their area. During World War II, the German monks couldn't leave this area. So you know what they did? They were so bored in their writings, they said, we are becoming atrophied. We need to work out. I kid you not. They began working out by digging holes. Guess what they found? They found that synagogue. In that synagogue, we found archaeological evidence that said it was built by a Roman centurion funded by him. You say, well, so what? The New Testament says that there was a centurion in Capernaum who funded and gave them the opportunity to build a synagogue. That's what I love about the Bible. Faith founded upon fact. Not only that, that room can hold where the General Assembly meets. You can meet with 245 people there in that place. We can get the entire 3 buses of our tour inside that general area and give the gospel, which we did this last spring. It's an awesome blessing. Next slide, if you would. This area is beautiful. There you can see. Now look at the terrain. If you go to the right, Mount Hermon, covered in snow at this time of the year, is beautiful, rising over 9,000 feet high. It is the waters of Hermon that flow into the Galilee from the Jordan, the northern Jordan River. The synagogue is right there along the shoreline. It's extremely quiet there, very beautiful. You can hear the water lapping on the shore. You can hear birds. But look at the terrain. It's very much like California. See the bougainvillea? See the banana? And the ficus growing and the juniper. It's very wonderful. You just love to be there. Next slide. More of that synagogue. Beautiful archaeological find. This is where Jesus preached and gave the word of God. And some things happened here that were very exciting. People were liberated here in a very powerful way. And so, as he was speaking there, the scriptures tell us that Jesus coming into this region would have been now fulfilling Isaiah chapter 9, that in the shadow of death, light has dawned, a reference to the messiahship of Christ. He's preaching, he's teaching. And this is where he actually would have preached from, and the word of God would have gone out. Now, if you can put your imagination in that room, you were there. And there's a second-story floor. The evidence is all there, where would have been an upper level. And there would have been the teaching going on, a beautiful setting. And there they are right along the Galilean Sea. And so Jesus begins to teach them. And he begins to bring application about the Bible to their own lives. The second thing we see is that Jesus taught them about God. It says in verse 32, and they were astonished, you got to circle that word, at his teaching, the instruction, for his word was with authority. His word was with authority, meaning that when Jesus taught them, he taught them with not only firsthand knowledge of the Bible, but instead of him quoting the rabbis, as was the custom of the rabbis of those days, they would just quote another rabbi. Jesus never quoted a rabbi like that in application. Jesus said, behold, I say to you. And they loved it. The people loved it. Why? Because Jesus spoke with passion and boldness about the Bible. And they were captivated by that. They were held bound by that. Never before had anyone had the boldness to say, I tell you this truth. And then he would make illustration. And it held the people captive. You say, Jack, you're making a big deal of it. I have to. I'll tell you the reason why. You see the word astonished right here? They were astonished at his teaching and teaching them about God. The word means, are you ready for this? The word means to slap your face. What? You mean Jesus slapped their face? No. He spoke the word of God with firsthand knowledge and boldness, and the people went like this. Look at me, everybody. They went like this. That's what it means. The word in Greek means they were slapped or shocked in the face when they heard what he had to say, and they loved it. Can you imagine going to a Bible study that Jesus is teaching? Oh, man. That's a pastor teacher's dream come true. In fact, when we put the word of God together, I'm sure I speak for all pastor teachers. Lord, let me say it like Jesus would say it. Oh, God, please fill me with your spirit that I might say what he would say. Can you imagine? We can only imagine that he spoke and people listened and they went, wow. They were completely astonished, shocked at what they were hearing. Why? There was a vessel of God standing before them that was so devoted, so pure, so holy, so committed, so filled with the agenda of heaven that when Christ came and began to speak, the very inside of the human soul was stirred. Why? Down deep inside, oh yes, and even you, Mr. Atheist, even you, Mrs. Atheist, down deep inside of you, there is a longing, remaining ember or effervescent that is left over from Eden that knows down deep inside, maybe, could God maybe be real?
Real life. Hey. pastor and Bible teacher Jack Hibbs, here on Real Life Radio, with his message called When Jesus Comes Near. Thank you for spending time with us today. You know, When Jesus Comes Near is part of Pastor Jack's new series called The Gospel of Luke. It's a series on the book of Luke and the unveiling